America's economic growth on his watch during a speech at a tank plant in Lima, Ohio. The president also taking a shot at labor union leaders in the wake of that GM plant closing in Lordstown, Ohio.
I had union leaders in the White House a few months ago, and the biggest guys. Nice guys, but they're Democrats no matter what. Okay? And you see where that's taken you. I want to deal with the people in the union, not the heads of the union. Because the heads of the union are not honest people. They're not honest.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts kicking off a new hour for us this morning. John, good morning.
Sandra, good morning to you. Ohio, clearly a very, very important state for the president politically in 2020. He won it back in 2016 on the promise of bringing jobs back there. It looked like that was happening for a while, but there has been a lot of job loss recently. So the president went to a real success story, that tank plant there that builds the M1A1 Abrams tank in Lima, Ohio, a place that was in danger of closing 7 years ago, to say, how good is the Trump economy? Listen here.
After so many years of budget cuts and layoffs, today jobs are coming back and pouring back, frankly, like never before. Veteran unemployment is now at the lowest level ever recorded. The world is down, but we still go up. Something's happening. That wouldn't happen under Barack Obama.
At that Lima, Ohio plant, the president again called on General Motors to reopen or sell the Lordstown, Ohio plant that had recently closed. As you saw at the beginning here, the president had praise for UAW workers, but criticism for union leaders. Here's what else he said.
Your union leaders aren't on my side, by the way. I watch them on television. They're not. But the unions, the people that work there, are on our side.
The president said that he saw people on television from the UAW who didn't agree with him, a likely reference to David Green, who was on the Fox News channel over the weekend, and said that there were a lot of voters in Ohio who were rethinking the idea of voting for President Trump in 2020 because he did promise to bring back jobs in Ohio. And as we said at the top, a lot of jobs had been lost. The president didn't like that a whole lot and actually took to Twitter to criticize Fox News for putting him on. Sandra?
John, and the president also making more comments about the late Senator John McCain.
Yeah, and let's set this up for you, because yesterday should have been an easy win. Here he was at a place, again, that was in danger of going under because of massive increases in defense spending. He turned the Lima Army tank plant around. It's expected to double its employment in the next few years, and the president acknowledged that. Listen here.
Well, you better love me. I kept this place open. That I can tell you. They said, we're closing it. And I said, no, we're not.
All right, so you had a win there, and then suddenly the president takes a complete left turn back into his feud with John McCain, who died 7 months ago, ripping him for giving the Steele dossier to the FBI and then voting against the repeal and replacement of Medicare. And then he went way off script. Listen to this.
I have to be honest, I've never liked him much. Hasn't been for me. I've really probably never will. I endorsed him at his request, and I gave him the kind of funeral that he wanted, which as president I had to approve. I don't care about this. I didn't get thank you. That's okay. We sent him on the way, but I wasn't a fan of John McCain.
I gave him the kind of funeral I wanted, and I wasn't even thanked for it. The president's comments on Twitter and on television and going out to the helicopter in the back of the White House have drawn fire from a lot of Republicans. Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia, who is a supporter of the president's policies and a big supporter of the media, yesterday went on public radio to call his comments deplorable. Sandra?
A lot of response still coming into that this morning. John Roberts, thank you.
Thank you.
And this Fox News alert, New Zealand's Prime Minister announcing an immediate ban on the sale of military-style semi-automatic firearms and high-capacity magazines. This after last Friday's shootings at 2 mosques that left 50 people dead.
The guns used in this terrorist attack had important distinguishing features. I absolutely believe there will be a common view amongst New Zealanders, those who use guns for legitimate purposes, and those who have never touched one, that the time for the mass and easy availability of these weapons must end.
Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt has more from our West Coast newsroom. Jonathan.
John, it's a move that has been made with stunning speed just 6 days since the terrorist massacre in which a self-described white supremacist appeared to use a high-capacity semi-automatic rifle. Those, and in the Prime Minister's words, any military-style semi-automatics are the kind of weapons that are now immediately banned from being sold and will be completely banned under a law expected to be enacted within weeks or even days. It's not clear exactly how many guns will be affected. New Zealand has around 250,000 licensed gun owners, and officials believe there are around 1.5 million guns, many of them unregistered, in the country. The number of high-capacity semi-automatics is unclear, but is likely in the thousands, according to experts.
One of the failings of our system, of course, means that we can have a range of weapons that are of this power and calibre and simply not know how many there are.
The city of Christchurch now the site of dozens of funerals and vigils. It is now just about 4 a.m. Friday morning in New Zealand, meaning in a few hours' time, Muslims will gather for the first Friday prayers since the attack. Thousands of non-Muslims are also expected to turn out to support the Muslim community there. John?
Our Chief Correspondent, Jonathan Hunt. Thanks.
For more on all this, let's bring back Katie Pavlich, editor of townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. Welcome back to America's Newsroom. Katie, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you too.
So I know you have some strong thoughts on this. New Zealand reacting by banning these assault weapons. We all continue to feel for this country after what they have gone through with this massacre, 2 mosques, 50 innocent lives taken. And now they're taking this move, Katie.
Well, I first want to point out that the shooter in this instance, who carried out this horrific crime, which everybody should and has condemned, specifically said that he used a firearm because he wanted to set off debate in America about the Second Amendment. He has certainly accomplished that goal, unfortunately. If you look at what Bernie Sanders is saying, he's saying that it's okay to ban firearms overnight through executive fiat without any kind of due process or legislative process. The New Zealand process now is that this ban is effective immediately. People will be fined if they are found with them. It will still go through Parliament and receive a vote. But if you look at the criteria for what they are calling military-style weapons, it means any semi-automatic firearm that has a detachable magazine capable of holding more than 5 rounds. If you apply that to America, you're talking about almost every single firearm that exists here. So that is what Bernie Sanders is endorsing. The NRA, as you already quoted, is responding, and I'm sure they will respond as other Democratic candidates weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, and going back to Bernie Sanders saying that this is what real action to stop gun violence looks like. So in the wake of New Zealand making this move, it perhaps boosts their case even further. Thoughts on that before we move on, Katie?
Well, my thought on that is, if you look at the situation in New Zealand, one of the Muslim men who was there praying chased away the shooter with a firearm. So is he going to have to turn in his firearm? Are people who are in houses of worship, who are vulnerable, whether you're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, going to have to make themselves even more defenseless against the evils that want to attack them? I think that's probably something we don't want to take away from people. And when people like Bernie Sanders, who is running for president of the United States, says this is what real reform looks like, he's talking about overnight stripping Americans of their Second Amendment rights and punishing them with high fines and prison time for refusing to give up those rights without some kind of legislative process.
Now to 2020, Katie, ex-Florida gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum announcing his creation of a voter registration campaign. Listen in his own words.
We are going to commit ourselves to registering and engaging 1 million voters between now and 2020's presidential election. I just can't wait for the image of us rolling them right on out of the White House and back to whatever planet they may have come from.
Katie, he says that we're going to commit ourselves to registering and engaging 1 million voters between now and 2020's presidential election. The road to the White House runs through Florida, says Andrew Gillum.
Yeah, as we know, Florida is very important when it comes to the Electoral College. Republicans should not take this goal lightly. Andrew Gillum is very well funded. He has about $4 million to carry out this initiative. Eric Holder, former Attorney General, has been working on a number of these voter registration issues and redistricting issues across the country for years now. Democrats have a goal of not only registering new voters, but taking back voters who are Democrats who voted for Trump in 2016. They're trying to bring more people into the party, and clearly they have a pathway to do that with funding behind them.
And that funding, you referenced Gillum's PAC Forward Florida had $3.9 million available as of February 28th to fund his registration efforts. All right, Katie Pavlich, always good to start off a new hour with you. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much.
And a Fox News alert after President Trump says he would like it to be public. The White House
bombs have stopped dropping. The gunfire has disappeared. There's an eerie calm here now, and I think we have witnessed the end of the caliphate.
That's our Benjamin Hall, who's been reporting live all week from the front lines in Syria, where U.S.-backed forces are on the verge of snuffing out ISIS. President Trump yesterday predicting the imminent defeat of that terror group. Let's bring in Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Foreign Policy Research at the Brookings Institution. I want to start, Michael, with a look at the map of what ISIS territory was held back in 2015, January 2015, the final year of the Obama administration, versus what it holds today. President Trump is pretty proud of that. He made that point in Ohio yesterday. Does he get to take the credit?
Some of it, certainly, although let's get the dates really clear, because the maximal extent of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, as you know, was late 2014 into early 2015. There were still 2 years left of the Obama administration at that time, and there was a lot of progress made in those last 2 years. One can say that President Obama did not do a good job in preventing the emergence of ISIS in the first place, and he certainly struggled for a broader strategy towards the Syrian civil war. But the targeted campaign against ISIS really began with the fall of Mosul in Iraq in the summer of 2014, roughly speaking, and there was considerable progress made over those next 2 years. President Trump then adopted that same campaign plan, arguably reinforced it a bit, continued to give support to Secretary Mattis, General Votel at Central Command, and the momentum was sustained and perhaps even increased. So that's the way I talk about it and think about it in broader historical terms. Now we're at a good point in terms of defeating ISIS from holding territory, but there are still perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 ISIS fighters in the general region. So we've got to worry about preventing their reemergence the same way that ISIS sort of grew out of the ashes of al-Qaeda in Iraq years before.
Someone who shares those concerns is Diana Foley. Her son James is one of the Americans. He was a journalist who was murdered at the hands of ISIS. Here's what she has to say about the future.
We need to be very shrewd about how we deal with ISIS. The al-Baghdadi, the leadership is still at large. They know how to hide and infiltrate our societies. So I feel we need to be very vigilant.
It's a lot easier, Michael, to reclaim territory than to quash an ideology.
No doubt. And we have the added problem, and President Trump cannot be blamed for this, that Syria is still a mess. And that as long as Syria is a mess and it's being run by an Alawite group, which is, as you know, linked to Shia Islam, the Sunni Muslims in Syria feel very disenfranchised. They're the ones that suffered barrel bombing. Their neighborhoods are destroyed. They don't have good places to live. They don't have jobs. It's the same kind of environment that in Iraq a few years earlier gave rise to the extremist al-Qaeda and Mesopotamia movement that we then had to surge forces to defeat under General Petraeus. So that same dynamic of an oppressed Sunni population feeling like it has no future and nowhere to go politically is a very, very scary one. And that's still where we are, I'm afraid, inside of Syria. So I'm glad President Trump is leaving those few hundred U.S. forces. That gives us some leverage in the ongoing effort to try to wind that war down, help protect our local allies, the Kurds, some of the Sunnis. There's a long ways to go at preventing Syria from again being sort of a hotbed where an ISIS group could recongregate and reemerge.
Right, because the president at first announced he was pulling all the troops out of Syria. It sounds like you applaud keeping at least a small American force there.
Absolutely. It strikes me as probably a little on the small side, but as long as we're flexible, as long as we keep an eye on what's going on, as long as the president is willing to consider slightly higher numbers. The good news is nobody's talking about another big invasion, and the U.S. military over the years has figured out how to be pretty potent with a few hundred forces here and a few thousand forces there, backed up by air power and our technology. That's to their great credit. And I think that model gives us some options now going forward. But Syria is a long way from solved, and therefore ISIS in Syria and elsewhere is a long way from being definitively defeated.
Also nice that we're not seeing the horrific mass murders on a daily basis that we were seeing when ISIS was at the height of its power. Michael O'Hanlon from the Brookings Institution, thank you.
Coming up, more on the situation in Syria, including a different view of what it's like to report from the front lines.
And then this is where
the criminal probe into Boeing. Investigators wanting to know why the plane was certified safe ahead of two deadly crashes, leaving more than 300 people dead. Doug McElway is following the latest developments from Washington on this ongoing investigation. Doug, how many agencies are taking part in this now?
Well, Sandra, we've got the grand jury subpoena, at least one congressional investigation and hearing set for next Wednesday in the Senate, more likely to come there. We've got the Department of Transportation IG investigation and now the FBI involved in that one as well, lending its investigative expertise. What makes this so unusual is that this is a criminal probe. That's against tradition. Some fear it could be counterproductive, lending to the hiding of information by potential targets. Not productive, critics say, when transparency and safety is the goal. There are some new developments today. Reuters is reporting that the pilot in the fatal Ethiopian air crash last week never had a chance to train on that airline's MAX 8 simulator. He had been scheduled for a refresher course last March, 2 months after the airline had received the simulator. Reuters got that information from a colleague pilot in a hotel lobby who had been instructed by the airline not to speak publicly. The news is significant because of allegations that Boeing built the new MAX 8 as a plane that would not impose expensive training costs on airlines because of its similarity to previous 737 models. In fact, it differed considerably because of its automation to correct that pitch-up tendency. The failure of pilots to understand the cutoff switch for that automation appears to be a component in both accidents. Meanwhile, Boeing has said that it will make an optional safety feature on its 737s standard now. This pertains to two angle of attack sensors just outside the pilot and co-pilot's windows. To save money, some lower cost carriers opted to have just one sensor wired up, meaning there would be no way during a malfunction to tell if there was a discrepancy between the two. The wiring up of the sensors will become standard now. Sandra?
Doug, meanwhile, Acting Secretary of Defense Pat Shanahan is in potential hot water for his ties to Boeing and defense contracts. What's happening there?
That's right. The Defense Department's Inspector General said yesterday that it has now opened an investigation into whether Acting Secretary Patrick Shanahan used his position to improperly promote his former employer, which was Boeing. The complaint is based on comments that Shanahan made praising Boeing over competitor Lockheed Martin, which is the maker of the F-35 fighter jet. He said that Lockheed Martin doesn't know how to run a program, and he pushed the Pentagon to buy more Boeing F-15X models, which the Pentagon apparently does not want. Shanahan told Congress that he welcomes an investigation. Back to you, Sandra.
All right, Doug McElway, thank you. We've got a developing situation here on Venezuela. The opposition leader there, Juan Guaido, says agents of the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, have detained his chief of staff and personal lawyer in a raid overnight. We've got a response now from Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. He has issued a tweet on the situation saying this. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted just a short time ago, the United States condemns raids by Maduro's security services and detention of Roberto Marrero, chief of staff to interim president Juan Guaido. We call for his immediate release. We will hold accountable those involved. That is the last that we have heard from the Secretary of State on that, calling for his immediate release. This is a situation that developed overnight and that we're able to confirm now with Mike Pompeo weighing in on that and putting that statement out. But this is obviously, John, something that highly escalates the ongoing situation.
Juan Guaido has been incredibly courageous as he has taken on the worst of the forces of the Maduro government has called himself the acting president and wants to return that country to some semblance of normalcy. But now the kidnapping, if you will, of his chief of staff sends a pretty ominous signal. It's a story we will... Catherine Herridge has more on that. Catherine.
Well, thank you, John, and good morning. Based on our reporting here at Fox, the data suggests this is the end game. Our contacts report that there has been no serious or lengthy engagement with the White House since the president responded with written answers last November. And knowledgeable sources tell us that special counsel investigators are taking steps that suggest they are tying up loose ends. This morning's reporters camped outside the special counsel's office in Northwest Washington. The Associated Press capturing this image of Mueller pulling into his downtown garage at the office. It is his custom and routine to often drive himself. Mueller has not commented on the investigation since his appointment in May 2017, nor the timing of the report's conclusion. Next steps will be guided by these federal regulations known as 28 CFR 600. They explicitly state the Mueller report is confidential to the Attorney General William Barr and must outline prosecutions and what's called declinations. Those are cases where no criminal action is taken. The Attorney General is required to report to Congress and the public, but the federal regulations offer guidance and are less clear that Barr's report should be in keeping with established Justice Department practices. And just yesterday, the president told reporters on the White House lawn that he would like to see the full Mueller report public.
I don't mind. I mean, frankly, I told the House, if you want, let them see it. Let it come out. Let people see it. That's up to the Attorney General. I think it's ridiculous, but I want to see the report.
That will ultimately be up to the Attorney General, William Barr. I would note that those close to the president's legal team are expressing growing confidence that the Mueller report will not show direct or concrete evidence of collusion, and they believe it may be an opportunity to use that report to justify refusal to cooperate with these Democratic-led investigations on the Hill, John.
All of Washington, all of us really are waiting for the release of that report. Catherine Herridge, thanks.
You're welcome.
Now to a surge of asylum seekers at the Texas border, causing an overflow at detention facilities. Officials say the lack of space is forcing them to release hundreds of migrants onto the streets after processing. Border Patrol calling the situation unsustainable.
We have to feed those people all of the 3 meals a day. We have to provide them snacks. We provide them juice. We have to provide diapers. We have to provide baby formula. We have to provide hygiene products. So all those things are costing us over $100,000 a month just here in Yuma.
Joining us now, North Carolina Congressman Mark Walker, Vice Chair of the House GOP Conference and a member of the Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, good morning to you. Very serious situation at the border. Kirstjen Nielsen says that the situation is spiraling out of control at our border and that the crisis will, quote, get even worse. What are we doing about it?
Well, we have some who are not wanting to do anything about it. We have some that are actually wanting to tear down the existing structures. Secretary Nielsen, she was correct. She has warned us that this was an impending crisis. Since the last administration, family apprehensions have increased by over 800%. That is a crisis. That's not manufactured. It's a national emergency, and we need to move forward to resolve it as soon as we can.
She went on to detail that in February we saw 30% jump over the previous month. Agents apprehending or encountering nearly 75,000 aliens, she details. That, she says, was an 80% jump year over year. How are we suited to handle this? How did we get here, Congressman?
Our infrastructure, our border agents, everything is on the verge of breaking down. In fact, just in fiscal year alone, which starts this past October, we've already had 138,000 criminal arrests of illegal aliens. That's a huge crisis. Now, listen, I applaud groups like World Relief and others who are doing humanitarian work, but that's what we have now, a humanitarian and a security crisis. When 1 out of 3 of young females are migrants that are coming across trying to make it to our border are assaulted, 1 out of 6 even young men or boys, I don't know how much more of a crisis that it gets than being able to do something about it. We have to do that now. It's a huge issue right now, Sandra, and we have those in Washington, D.C. that continue to turn their back and ignore this incredible crisis.
Let me ask you about, and this is published in our own reporting, but it's citing the Times, and this is an immigrant group, an attorney with the Texas Civil Rights Project, is quoted in our own reporting saying they are doing this deliberately, releasing these hundreds of migrants at the border into the country so that they can release a ton of people at once and create chaos. It goes back to the political point and the debate that's going on that somehow this is a manufactured crisis rather than a real one. What is your response to that?
Listen, when you go down to the border, you'll find some of the hardest working people that you'll ever meet. Men and women who are putting, in some cases, their life on the line. They don't know what kind of diseases they're intercepting, what kind of potential criminal activity they're intercepting, but they're willing to put their heart and soul into it. I find that incredibly offensive. It's a backslap of those who are there trying to reach out, trying to serve from a humanitarian crisis, from a humanitarian concept. It's a travesty, and I think it's past time that we do something about it.
That reporting was quickly followed up with a Border Patrol agent responding to it being a political stunt. In his words, it is a crisis. It's not a self-proclaimed crisis. It's very real. Congressman, appreciate your time this morning. Did you have a final thought there?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people are contacting their representatives and doing something about this. This is way past time. It's urgent. Agree with Secretary Nelson. Let's do on it now.
Congressman Mark Walker, thank you.
Here's a first for a major presidential campaign. Senator Bernie Sanders' team announcing that some members of its staff have unionized. Peter Ducey live in Washington with more on that. Peter?
John, it could be a sign of a growing trend because Bernie Sanders likes to brag that many progressive policies he pitched in 2016 that were dismissed as radical then are now part of the Democratic mainstream. And he's out with a new idea, letting everybody that works for him below the title of deputy director form a union.
We're working with the United Food and Commercial Workers, who's organized our employees, and we're talking to them about the unique challenges of being a presidential campaign staffer. That is, that you work long hours, that you may have to travel a lot, that you may have to deploy from one state to the next state. And those are all things that are going to be worked out in the course of negotiations.
This union that is forming is only a few dozen members strong for now, but could grow to about 1,000 workers as the campaign wears on, and the idea could soon spread to the staff of the only Democratic candidate for president who raised more money on campaign launch day than Bernie, Beto O'Rourke.
Absolutely. If those who work on this campaign and who comprise what I hope will be the largest grassroots effort this nation has ever seen want to unionize, I support that all the way.
Bernie Sanders joined a picket line in Los Angeles yesterday where UCLA workers were protesting for higher wages, and he stressed there that he thinks the way to strengthen the middle class is to grow trade unions. He also pledged to make it easier, not harder, for workers to join unions if he becomes president, and he's trying to show how as a candidate. John?
All right, Peter Ducey in Washington, thanks.
A spat brewing between former presidential candidate Michael Dukakis and President Trump after the president took a shot at Dukakis at a tank plant in Ohio yesterday.
I want to get into him, but then I remember when a man named Dukakis got into a tank. And I remember he tanked when he got into the tank.
The president referring to this moment when Dukakis put on a military helmet and rode in a tank during the 1988 campaign, a move that at the time sparked heavy criticism. Dukakis now firing back, saying this: "I call Trump these days the draft dodger in chief. While thousands of young Americans were fighting and dying in Vietnam, he was doing everything he could not to serve. Trump claimed he had bone spurs in his heels and he can't even remember where they were. Just another rich kid who used his father's influence to avoid military service." That's the latest in the back and forth there.
Meantime, President Trump's economic team doubling down on attacking socialism, calling it a major threat to our economy. Will that be a winning
for me? And of this, I am absolutely sure. You, the public, have had enough. You're tired of the infighting. You're tired of the political games and the arcane procedural rows. Tired of MPs talking about nothing else but Brexit.
That's British Prime Minister Theresa May appealing to voters as she tries to extend the deadline for leaving the European Union. May admits a Brexit plan will not be approved by March 29th. That's the deadline after months of chaotic negotiations. Let's bring in Steve Hilton, former senior advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron and host of The Next Revolution here on Fox News Channel. So she is an advocate of Brexit. She says it's Parliament's fault that they haven't been able to come up with the details to get it done.
Well, that's a ridiculous thing for her to say. What you saw there, frankly, is a beaten, broken Prime Minister. Yes, she has been trying to deliver Brexit, but remember, John, that she campaigned against Brexit. She was against it all along. By some kind of political accident, she ended up as the Prime Minister having to deliver it. Her attitude all along has been wrong. Instead of seeing Brexit as an opportunity for Britain to leave the EU and prosper outside of its regulatory burden, she saw it as a damage limitation exercise. That set the tone for these negotiations, which have really ended in total chaos. And so she shares some of the responsibility. She's right to say Parliament was against Brexit as well, despite the people voting for it. But the truth is, it's the entire British establishment that is trying to reverse the people's vote. That's the problem at the heart of this.
So some people are saying that, Britain should just leave without any kind of a deal. Would you advise such a thing?
Yes, and I have publicly. That's been my position all along. In a sense, that's the only true version of Brexit, because all the other versions of Brexit that are being put out there, all the other methods of leaving, still involve the EU having some kind of jurisdiction over the UK. That's not what people voted for. So that's why still, even at this late stage, there's a possibility of leaving without a deal, which in fact is the real implementation of what the people voted for.
Let's talk a little bit about the economic situation in the United States, and it's sort of borne out by the number of times that the word socialism was used in last year's White House economic report. That number, 0. This year, there are 110 references to socialism in the White House economic report. Clearly, this White House thinks this is a threat that needs to be squashed.
Well, I think they're right to emphasize it, because as we move towards the elections next year, it's going to be very evident that you've got a Democratic Party that has moved decisively to the left and is advocating positions which just a couple of years ago would have been seen as extreme by most Democrats. And it's quite right for the president and his team to point out the consequences of voting either Republican or Democrat. Now, on their side, they've got a record to point to. They can say, look, when you follow the capitalist model and really boost it with tax cuts and deregulation to let businesses grow and create jobs, look at the result. In particular, look at the result for working Americans, for those at the lower end of the income scale. They've done the best out of this kind of free market capitalism. If you go in the other direction, then it's going to be working Americans who are hurt the most. High taxes, actually the rich have always been able to avoid them. The people who are really hurt by the centralization